The padded envelope cost $4.11 to mail certified. Inside it was a single document, 11 pages, and one yellow sticky note in my handwriting that said only, "Read page 7, paragraph 3. The margin note is in Dad's hand. I stood at the counter of the post office on Kellner Road at 9:46 on a Tuesday morning in October, and I handed it to the woman behind the desk without saying anything other than yes, certified, and no return receipt required. I drove home on the Tulane County Road, and I did not turn the radio on. I want to be honest about what I felt. It was not triumph. It was not even relief, exactly. It was more like setting down a box you have been carrying so long that you stopped noticing the weight until the moment you put it on the floor and felt your shoulders drop 2 inches. I had been carrying something like that weight for 11 years. Maybe longer. Maybe since the first October I drove 4 hours to close a house that had no one else to close it, and I thought, this is fine. This is just what I do. This is just who I am in this family. My name is Rosalind Edenhart, and I am 63 years old. And my father died on a Thursday in February after a short illness that was not as short as the family told people it was. He was 79. He had been at the lake house every summer of his adult life, and he died in the bedroom of the house he grew up in, not the one on the lake, which is the detail I think about more than I probably should. The lake house has been in my family since 1971. My father, Donald Edenhart, bought it the year my older brother Gerald was born, which is a detail Gerald has used his entire adult life to argue that the house was always meant to be his, as though arriving first entitled him to everything that came after. It's 3 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen with a copper kettle my grandmother left on the stove so long it calcified to the burner, a dock that needs replacing every 12 years, and a view of Kellner Lake that turns copper and silver in the late afternoon in September. I have loved that house my whole life. Gerald has loved what it represents. There is 11 years of property tax records in my name. 11 years of contractor invoices I paid because the doc didn't care which sibling's name was on the deed. It cared about whether someone showed up in May with a check and a plan. I have a file folder, navy blue, which I kept in the filing cabinet in my home office in Duluth, and inside it I kept every receipt. For $1,287 in dock restoration in 2017, $1,890 in roof shingles in 2019, $612.50 in winter pipe insulation in 2021. I kept records the way our father taught me to keep records, because he said a receipt was a memory you could prove. I believed him so completely that I kept every one, going back to 2012, in chronological order in that navy folder, the way some people keep photographs. Gerald lives 40 minutes from the lake house. He visited 17 times in the last 11 years. I counted because I kept the guest log my mother started in 1984, a green cloth-bound notebook she left on the kitchen shelf where it had always been. 17 visits in 11 years. He brought his wife Paula for 3 of them and his son Derek for 2. He ate the food I stocked, used the dock I maintained, and left without thanking me, which is not the thing that hurt me. People don't always say thank you. That's ordinary. What hurt was the assumption underneath the silence, the assumption that the house was being maintained the way a rental property gets maintained, by some invisible arrangement, by someone whose labor was simply part of the background noise of things working as they should. I was the background noise. I need to say something honest about Gerald, because this story isn't fair to him if I don't. Gerald is 14 years older than I am. He was born into a different version of our family, a version before our mother's depression settled into the walls of every house we lived in, before our father learned to compensate for her absences by over-organizing his remaining child, which was me. Gerald grew up in a house where he was the wanted, celebrated first. He had birthday parties with guests. He had summers where my mother was well enough to pack lunches and drive to baseball games. He had a version of our father who was still learning how to be a father, still optimistic, still energetic in the way young men are before they have spent 15 years quietly managing someone else's grief. I grew up in the same house as a different set of facts. I think Gerald has never fully understood that the man who raised him was already a different man by the time he raised me, more careful, more deliberate, more quietly grateful, and that the bond between my father and me was not favoritism. It was chronology. It was two people who found each other after the same loss and did the best they could. Gerald's cruelty was not malice, not the way people mean when they say that word. It was fear. He was afraid that my closeness with our father meant he had been cheated out of something, and the only way he knew how to handle that fear was to take up as much space as possible before anyone could tell him what was already there. He had been doing it since I was a child. I had spent decades adjusting to accommodate him, and I had been so patient about it that I had made myself invisible in the process. I did not understand this as clearly then as I do now. I understood it like a bruise. You know it's there, you just can't see it unless someone presses on it. The dinner where it became undeniable, not where it started, because it had been starting for 50 years in small ways, but where it became something I could no longer accommodate without losing something essential, was 3 weeks after our father's funeral. Late March. Gerald had organized it himself, which I should have recognized as a signal, but grief makes you slow in ways you don't anticipate. He booked the private room at Harrington's on 5th, a restaurant he and Paula liked, and he sent a group text to me, my cousin Diane, Diane's husband Pete, Gerald's son Derek, and my father's oldest friend, a man named Russell Ingleton who had been at the lake house the summer my parents met and had never really stopped being a part of our family in the way certain people become permanent without ever asking permission. 14 of us total, which is the number I keep coming back to because it is the number that tells me Gerald had planned it. You don't book a 14-person private dinner for a casual conversation about grief. You book it because you want witnesses. I arrived at 7:15. Gerald was already there, already holding his wine glass. He hugged me the way people hug at funerals, both hands, but nothing behind it. Paula kissed my cheek. Derek shook my hand and looked briefly at the floor. The food was good. The first hour was what grief dinners are. Stories about Dad, his laugh, his terrible puns, the time he drove the wrong direction on a one-way street outside of Ashland and refused to acknowledge it for 45 minutes. Russell told the story about the summer of 1973 and the motorboat that wasn't as waterproof as advertised. People laughed. I laughed. I ate my salmon and I felt, briefly, that this was enough. That people loving the same person was enough of a reason to be in a room together. Then Gerald stood up. He didn't clink his glass. He just stood, and the table went quiet in the way tables go quiet when the person who organized the dinner wants to speak. I want to say something about the lake house, he said. I put down my fork. Dad always intended it for me. I think everyone at this table knew that. He told me when I was young, he said, Gerald, this place is your inheritance. It was something between him and me. I just want everyone to know that I'll be taking over the management going forward, and I'll handle everything from here.
He paused. He looked at me.
I know Rosalind has been helping out, and I appreciate that. I do. But this is a family property, and it's time it was treated like one. He sat down. Helping out. 11 years. 41 round trips. $6,789.50 in receipts in a Navy folder. Helping out. Diane looked at her plate. Pete looked at the wall. Russell looked at me with an expression I couldn't read except that it was careful. The way a person looks when they know something is wrong but aren't sure yet whether they should say so. Gerald lifted his wine glass. I did not say anything. I finished the piece of salmon on my plate. I ate it slowly while the conversation resumed around me, careful and slightly too loud, the way a dinner conversation gets when everyone has just witnessed something they would prefer not to have witnessed. I drank my water. I thanked the server when she refilled my glass. I did not cry. I did not argue. I did not give Gerald the scene he had set the table for. What I thought, sitting there, was that I had paid $4,287 to restore a dock that my brother had just claimed. What I thought was that I had driven 4 hours each way, 41 times in 11 years, and I had a green cloth-bound notebook on the kitchen shelf with 17 of Gerald's visits logged in my mother's handwriting and mine, and that notebook was evidence the way a receipt is evidence. What I thought was, Dad would not have done it this way. I drove home that night in the dark. 4 hours and 15 minutes, no music, no radio, nothing but the road and the headlights and the slow, steady understanding settling into me that I was going to have to do something. I didn't know what yet. I only knew it would be calm. I only knew it would be documented. And I knew, most of all, that it was not going to be a scene at a dinner table because the people who had organized dinner table scenes in my family had never once gotten what they wanted from them, and I was not about to start now. I went back to my ordinary life for 3 weeks, and I kept it carefully. I worked at the dental office where I had been an office administrator for 22 years, filing, scheduling, managing the insurance claims that arrived like a slow and endless tide. I walked my neighborhood in the evenings. I called Diane once, briefly, and we did not talk about the dinner directly, but she said at the end of the call, "I'm sorry I didn't say anything that night," and I said, "It's okay," and we both understood I meant, not yet, but someday. The grief of losing my father was a separate thing from all of this, and I want to be clear about that. I missed him the way you miss someone you loved simply and well, in small moments, at unexpected times. Standing at the kitchen window with my Earl Grey tea in the white mug he had given me the Christmas, he was 75. Reaching for the phone to call him about something ordinary and arriving, a fraction of a second later, at the fact that the call was not possible anymore. These were private losses, mine alone, and I kept them separate from the question of the lake house because my father was not reducible to a property dispute. He was a person. He was my person. The house was one chapter of a long book, and I refused to let Gerald collapse the whole book into that one chapter. 3 weeks after the dinner, I drove up to the lake house to close it for winter. This was something I had done every October since 2012. I knew the routine: drain the pipes, pull the dock sections, lock the copper kettle in the cupboard, check the window seals, leave the key under the third flagstone on the left. Gerald had never done it. Not once. I worked through the afternoon. The light on the lake was the color it gets in October, not gold, not gray, but something between them, like pewter heated until it almost glows. I drained the pipes. I pulled the dock boards. I stacked them in the shed the way my father had shown me, alternating the grain direction, so they wouldn't warp. I checked every window seal and found one on the north side that needed recocking, and I went to the utility drawer and found the caulk gun and the tube I had left there in September, and I fixed it, and I put the gun back in the drawer. This is what showing up looks like. It is not dramatic. It is a caulk gun in a utility drawer and the muscle memory of knowing where things are. It is the $612.50 insulation job you scheduled in October because no one else will do it before the pipes freeze. It is the key under the third flagstone and the guest log on the shelf and the copper kettle locked in the cupboard every year, released every May. It is repetition. It is love expressed as maintenance. I worked until nearly 4 in the afternoon. I stood on the dock, the last of the boards still to pull, and I looked out at the lake for a few minutes without doing anything. The water was the color of old pewter. 3 geese crossed above the tree line on the far shore and disappeared. I thought about my father standing in this same spot in other Octobers before I was old enough to do any of this myself. I thought about what he must have seen when he looked at me all those years. A daughter who kept showing up, who never asked to be thanked for it, who believed, the way he had taught her to believe, that the work spoke for itself. In the back bedroom, the small one, the one that had been my room when I was a child, there was a closet I had not opened in years. I don't know what made me open it that afternoon. Habit, maybe. The way you do a full sweep of a house when you're closing it, checking every corner. Or something quieter than habit. Some instinct I can't fully explain except to say that I had been thinking all day about my father's face the last time we were here together, the previous June, the two of us on the dock with our coffee and the still morning water, and not much to say. He had seemed peaceful. He had seemed like a man who had put his affairs in order. I had not known then what that meant exactly. I know now that there is a particular kind of peace that comes from having done the hard thing quietly and well, and then waiting for time to do the rest. The closet held a folded wool blanket, a pair of old rubber boots, 3 cardboard boxes of paperback novels from the 80s, and, on the top shelf behind the novels, a cedar box. It was the size of a shoebox. It had a brass latch, not locked. I lifted it down and set it on the bed. Inside, 3 letters in my mother's handwriting, a photograph of my parents at the lake in what must have been 1973, my mother laughing at something off camera, my father looking at her with the expression I remembered from my childhood, that expression of complete and uncomplicated attention, a folded copy of the original 1971 property deed, and beneath that, underneath everything else, a second document. 11 pages. Typed on legal paper. A date in the upper right corner, September 14th, 2019. I sat down on the edge of the bed, and I read it. It was a transfer of ownership agreement, signed by my father, witnessed by a notary whose stamp was at the bottom of each page, designating the lake house property at Lot 14, Kellner Road, to Rosalind and Edenhart, effective upon the death of Donald R. Edenhart or his incapacitation. On page 7, in the margin beside paragraph 3, in my father's unmistakable handwriting, he pressed hard when he wrote, left grooves in the paper like the words were meant to last, were 11 words. Rosie knows where the cedar box is. She always checked the top shelf.
I sat on that bed for a long time.
I did not read it again right away. I set it carefully back in the cedar box, and I sat there with my hands in my lap and the October light coming through the window, and I thought about my father pressing a pen into that margin in September of 2019, 3 years before he died, and I thought about how much he had known and how quietly he had known it and how little he had ever said directly. I thought about the photograph downstairs of me at 8 years old at the same lake, framed in white with his handwriting on the back. I thought about the copper kettle and the caulk gun, and 41 round trips, and a green cloth-bound guest log with 17 of Gerald's visits recorded. He had seen it. All of it. He had seen exactly what was happening, and he had done the most organized, permanent, non-confrontational thing he could think of. He had put it in writing, and he had trusted me to find it. I want to tell you what it was like to drive home that afternoon because I think it matters. I got to my car at 4:47. I sat in the driveway with the engine off and the cedar box on the passenger seat, and I did not move for 31 minutes. I know it was 31 minutes because I watched the clock on the dashboard go from 4:47 to 5:18 without starting the car. The lake was visible from the driveway, just barely, through the bare-limbed trees. The light had gone from pewter to gray. A gust came through and lifted a few leaves off the ground and set them down again, and the whole world felt very still and very large. What I felt sitting there was not what I expected. I had expected vindication, that tight, certain heat of being right when someone has spent years insisting you were wrong. Instead, I felt something slower and stranger, something close to grief. I was holding proof that my father had seen the whole shape of the problem between Gerald and me. He had known. He had known clearly enough to sit down in front of a notary in September of 2019 and sign 11 pages, and then hide them in a cedar box and leave a note in the margin pointing only to me. And he had never told me. Not once. He had carried that knowledge the way he carried so many things, quietly, alone, trusting that the right moment would arrive, or trusting that the right person would eventually climb up and look. I thought about whether I was angry at him for that. I sat with the question honestly, the way he had taught me to sit with hard things. I decided I was not. He was a man who had watched conflict hollow out his family for 30 years, who had learned that saying difficult things in his particular family produced more damage than resolution. He had solved the problem the way he solved every problem, methodically on paper, with his name at the bottom. He trusted the document more than he trusted the conversation, and after 63 years of watching how conversations went in our family, I could not argue with that logic. What I was mostly was tired. Tired of carrying what no one acknowledged. Tired of being the person who shows up and drains the pipes and checks the window seals and smiles over salmon at 14 witnesses, while a man who visited 17 times in 11 years announces that he will be taking over the management going forward. I was tired of making myself small enough to fit inside someone else's version of events. I thought, sitting there, about the summer I was 12 years old, and I asked my father why he always kept every bill and every receipt and every contract in labeled folders in the filing cabinet, and he said, because the people who keep records are the people who can tell the truth later. I thought he was talking about taxes. I understand now that he was talking about much more than taxes. He was talking about a life spent in a family where the loudest version of events usually won, and about the quiet, stubborn work of making sure another version existed somewhere, documented, signed, waiting. I was the other version. I had been the other version my whole life. I started the car. I drove home. A receipt is a memory you can prove. A deed is a decision you can hold. The following Monday, I called my father's estate attorney. Her name was Patricia Vasquez, and she had handled my father's affairs for 18 years, which meant she was not surprised by anything I told her. I drove to her office on Tuesday morning with a cedar box on the passenger seat and the document in a manila envelope. Patricia read it in 11 minutes. She set it on her desk and looked at me the way someone looks when a thing confirms what they already quietly suspected. "This is properly executed," she said. "Notarized, witnessed, dated, filed. Your father sent me a copy in November 2019. I've been waiting to hear from you." I asked her why she hadn't contacted me after the funeral. "I was waiting to see how the family handled it," she said. "Some families work these things out. I hoped yours might." We sat with that for a moment. The afternoon light came through the blinds behind her and lay across the desk in long pale stripes. Outside, somewhere, someone was mowing a lawn. There are these ordinary moments in the middle of extraordinary ones, and I have found that paying attention to them helps. "I'd like to send certified copies to the relevant parties," I said. "That's your right," she said. "That's entirely your right. I had the copies made at the office supply store on 3rd Avenue. 4 copies, for certified envelopes, each addressed in my own handwriting. Gerald. Derek, Gerald's son. Diane, my cousin, because she had been at that dinner and had looked at her plate and deserved better information than the version Gerald would eventually give her. And Russell Ingleton, because he had looked at me across that dinner table with careful knowing eyes, and because he had known my father longer than Gerald had, and because I thought he should know that my father's quiet attention had not ended with his life. It had only been waiting in a cedar box on a top shelf. I mailed them Tuesday morning at 9:46 from the post office on Kellner Road. Certified mail, no return receipt. Then I went home and made tea in the white mug and sat at my kitchen table in the quiet, and I waited for the world to rearrange itself around what was true. Gerald's lawyer called on Friday afternoon at 3:22. She was very precise and very fast, and she opened by saying that her client wished to discuss the matter before any formal proceedings, which is a sentence that tells you a great deal about what someone has just realized they are facing. I told her there was nothing to discuss. The document was properly executed. Patricia Vasquez had held a copy since November 2019. The property had been in my name, legally, in the county records since my father's death in February. I said this in a voice I recognized as it came out of me. My father's voice. Measured. Not cold. Just clear, the way facts are clear when you have been keeping records for 11 years and you know where every piece of paper lives. "My client would like to understand," the lawyer said, "whether his sister intends to." "Tell your client," I said, "that I intend to open the lake house in May, the way I do every year. The dock will be in the water by the 3rd week of May, the way it always is. He is welcome to visit, the way he always has been. I will put his name in the guest log." I said goodbye, and I hung up. Diane called that same evening, a little before 7. She had been crying, which surprised me. She said she had not known. She said she had seen, at that dinner, that something was wrong, but she hadn't understood how wrong. She said she was sorry she had looked at her plate instead of saying something. I told her she didn't need to apologize. I told her I was glad she knew now. We talked for nearly an hour, not just about the house, but about grief, and about the strange suspended time between when someone dies and when the family finally shows you what it is made of. It was the best conversation I had had in months. Russell called the following Sunday from his landline, the connection slightly fuzzy the way landlines get. He said my father had told him, years ago, that he was handling things. He had trusted that. He was glad to know it was handled. "Your father was a careful man," Russell said. "He just didn't always tell you what he was being careful about." "No," I said. "He didn't. He was proud of you," Russell said. "He said it to me more times than I can count. He said you were the one who showed up." I thanked Russell. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen with the Earl Grey mug until it was empty, and then sat there a little longer. The photograph of me at 8 years old at the lake was on the windowsill across the room. White frame, my father's handwriting on the back, Rosie, July 1969, Kellner Lake. I had carried that photograph through every move I had made since I was 22 years old. I had not carried it for any particular reason I could name. I just always knew it belonged with me. Gerald did not contact me directly for many weeks. When he did, finally, it was a voicemail left on a Tuesday evening in late November, brief and careful in the way people are careful when they know they have been caught being something they'd prefer not to be caught being. He said he had been doing a lot of thinking. He said he hadn't understood, at the dinner, that I had been carrying the property alone. He said he was sorry he hadn't asked. He did not say he was sorry for the announcement. He did not say he was wrong. He said he wanted things to be okay between us, which is the kind of sentence that says everything about the distance between what a person understands and what they are willing to admit. I sat with his voicemail for 3 days. I played it twice. I thought about what my father would have wanted, and I thought about what I could actually give, and I thought hard about the difference between those two things. On the 4th day, I called him back. We talked for 41 minutes. We did not resolve everything. We didn't come close to resolving everything. But he listened, really listened, the way I am not sure he had ever quite listened to me before, when I told him what the 11 years had looked like from where I was standing. He was quiet for a long time when I finished. Not angry quiet. Something softer and heavier at the same time. I didn't know you were doing all that, he said.
I know, I said.
That's the part that took me 11 years to understand wasn't an accident. He didn't say anything for a while. Then, I'm sorry, Rosie. He used the name my father used. I don't know if he knew he did it. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment after we said goodbye, and I thought about how strange forgiveness is. Not the word, not the idea, but the actual experience of it, which is less like a door opening and more like a slow pressure releasing. It does not happen all at once. It happens in increments, across weeks and months and ordinary Tuesday evenings, until one day you realize the weight you've been carrying has changed shape. The lake house opens in May. I drive up on the 3rd weekend, pull the dock boards out of the shed, reverse stack them the right way, check the window seals. The copper kettle is still on the stove. I don't know why I've never moved it. I think because my grandmother left it there and my mother left it there after her, and some things are allowed to stay simply because they have earned their place. I think about my father more at the lake than anywhere else. I think about the fact that he saw the whole shape of the problem between Gerald and me and solved it the only way he knew how, quietly on paper, with his name on 11 pages and a note in the margin pointing to me. That is not how I would have done it. I would have said it out loud. I would have sat Gerald down and said, "This is what is real." I would have let the conversation be hard the way hard conversations have to be when you want them to actually mean something.
But my father was not me.
He was a man who had learned, across a long and difficult life, that conflict in his particular family produced damage rather than resolution. He adapted by being meticulous. He adapted by trusting paper. He adapted by writing 11 words in a margin and leaving a cedar box on a shelf and trusting that the right person would eventually climb up and look.
He was not wrong to trust me.
I always check the top shelf. I think about what it means to be the person who shows up. I have thought about it since I was young, since I understood that there are 2 kinds of presence in a family, the kind that makes noise and the kind that does the work, and that the world tends to celebrate the first kind because noise is easy to see. I spent a long time being ashamed of the kind I was. I wanted to be louder. I wanted to make announcements at dinners. I thought visibility was the point. I know better now. Some people only know how to love what they can name. And some of us love by doing the thing that needs doing, and we are seen by the people paying attention, even when we cannot see them seeing us. My father was paying attention for 63 years. He saw me. He recorded what he saw in 11 pages and signed his name at the bottom of each one. Saying no to what Gerald claimed that night did not make me cruel. It made me honest. It made me the steward of something real, not just a property, but a version of my father's care and intention that he had trusted me to carry forward. You do not give that away to keep the peace. You do not shrink yourself to fit inside someone else's announcement. Family, without respect, becomes something else. It becomes a performance of belonging, and the cost of that performance is paid by the person who never stops showing up, who never stops believing that if she does enough and gives enough, someone will finally see it. My father saw it. He put it on 11 pages and signed his name. Forgiveness is not access. I have forgiven Gerald for the dinner, For the 14 witnesses, for 11 years of treating the dock and the maintenance, and the showing up as simply the way things were. I have forgiven him because understanding why someone hurts you makes the hurt smaller, even if it does not make it gone. But forgiveness does not mean the house belongs to him. Understanding is not a key to the front door. The cedar box is on my kitchen shelf now, next to the Earl Grey tin and the photograph from 1969. Some things are allowed to be visible. Some things you are allowed to stop hiding on a top shelf in a closet no one else ever thought to open. If the people in your life have been taking what you built and calling it theirs, the labor, the maintenance, the showing up year after year, I want to ask you something. Not about them. About you. What would it cost you, really, to let the record speak? What would it cost you to put the document on the table, not with anger, not with a speech, but simply and plainly, the way my father signed his name on 11 pages of legal paper? Because it is true, and truth does not need to be loud to be permanent. Some truths wait in cedar boxes on top shelves until the right person is ready to find them. And the right person was always going to be the one who never stopped showing up.